So at last week's meeting of the Quality of Life Task Force, most of our time was spent working on discussing the events of July 9th on Myrtle Street. And as we all know, there were a series of events that occurred from the afternoon through the night that had a significant negative impact on the residents of that neighborhood. That began with a block party in the afternoon into the early evening that was permitted by the city, an ongoing house party that continued long after the block party had ended, and culminated with a shooting on Myrtle Street shortly after midnight. Our focus on the Quality of Life Task Force has been around the block party and what could we do differently and what recommendations could we make to prevent another Myrtle Street type of situation from happening in the future. Historically, block parties have been permitted by the city as special events under a city ordinance with regards to special events. There are lots of types of special events that are covered by the ordinance, block parties just being one of them. But unique to block parties is an allowed road closure with any conditions and terms that are set by police or fire. As we look back on the events of the 9th on Myrtle Street, and we've spent some time listening to some very valid complaints from residents in the Myrtle Street neighborhood, we've tried to address some of those, and particularly around the area of how residents should be notified, how the public should be aware of this type of event being permitted, and as to when it's appropriate for a police detail to be required to hopefully prevent any issues arising. So as a result of the input of all the agencies here last week, and as I said, some additional conversations, consultations that took place after that, we have submitted through my office, based on the work of the Quality of Life Task Force, an amended ordinance regarding special events with the city. I think that we've taken a step back. We've taken a hard look at the way these have been done in the past. And I can say that in my 3.5 years as mayor, we've issued a lot of permits for a lot of special events. This is the first time we've had this type of problem. But I do think it's incumbent upon us to make sure we don't have this type of problem again. And I think after listening to everyone, it was clear to me that there's a better way to do this than the way we've been doing it now. So we've submitted an ordinance change for the City Council's consideration regarding special events. And let me just outline for you what's in the ordinance, what the premise of it is, and what the additional recommendations will be based upon the work of this group. The ordinance does several very important things. First of all, it defines very specifically what a special event is, because the city for years has been issuing permits for a whole variety of special events, including things like peace marches and festivals and block parties and all types of events. So the first thing the ordinance change does, it gives a very specific definition of what a special event is. We think that's critical. It does require that if you're identified as one of these special events, you do need a license or a permit from the city. It outlines an application process for folks to apply. And the application process is not too far off of what we do now, but it does have some deadlines in terms of getting your application in sufficiently in time in advance of the event so that it can be properly reviewed. And we think that it's important. It sets a policy on special events, it sets a fee. The most important aspect of this proposed ordinance change is it transfers the issuing authority of these permits from the mayor's office to the License Commission. And I'll be the first one to agree that the License Commission is far better suited to be issuing and overseeing and supervising permits for special events than the mayor's office or any other elected office would be. So I think that's probably the most important change that's in the ordinance change, is transferring the authority and the responsibility for these permits for special events to the License Commission. And by transferring it to the License Commission, we immediately accomplish some things that we talked about last week. And that means now that when someone applies for a permit for a special event, that their application will have to get into the License Commission by a certain date so that it can be placed on an agenda and be considered at a public hearing. And there's no provision for that right now. So the License Commission will provide a format where there's a public hearing. We're going to make a set of recommendations to the License Commission. But one of the reasons why the License Commission is best suited to do this is the License Commission has the ability to promulgate its own regulations and guidelines. And I think it's important that the Commission have the ability to get into the specifics based upon recommendations. It will also give them a little flexibility that as they start going forward, they may, based upon their experience, want to change those guidelines a little bit. And if they do decide to do that, much easier done within the License Commission than having to keep going through an ordinance change process. So we've tried to put the framework here in the process for the special event permits, but really give the authority and the regulation of this to the License Commission. There is one other very important aspect that we've added to this, though, that we did put in the ordinance, and this is in direct response to some of the questions asked by Myrtle Street residents last week. The ordinance change does contain language that gives both the fire chief and/or his designee and the police chief and/or his designee the authority to revoke the permit at any time during the event, either if there are violations, or it doesn't even have to be a violation if they make a determination that it's in the public interest to revoke the permit. And I think, one of the situations that we dealt with on Myrtle Street is that when the police responded, they see this permit posted on the wall, and they're not 100% sure what they can and can't do under the permit. This will make it very clear that at any time, both the police department and the fire department will have the authority to revoke the permit if the event creates any threat or concern regarding public safety. I think it will give our public safety agencies a great deal of leverage in working with anyone that's hosting this type of event, the understanding that if they're not compliant with requests made by our public safety people, then they're just going to have the permit rescinded right on the spot. So I think that was a very important clarification and power that had to be in there. Now we are, along with filing this ordinance with the City Council, and I want to thank Ward 4 Councilor and retired Police Chief Paul Studensky for sponsoring this ordinance change with the Council. As the Quality of Life Task Force, we are making a series of recommendations to the License Commission for their consideration in establishing the guidelines. So we are recommending that when these applications come before the License Commission, that there should be a requirement that abutters are notified in advance of that hearing. The neighbors ought to know when one of these events is being planned, and the neighbors should have the opportunity to show up at a public hearing and either support or oppose the issuance of the permit. And I think that's something that was missing, that's an important addition, but again, this should be done on a regulatory basis by the License Commission. The public hearing will come automatically by being heard at a regularly scheduled meeting of the License Commission. We are also suggesting to the License Commission that when road closures are permitted, that those road closures should be done by the DPW under the supervision of the police department. We will take care of seeing where the road is closed, how it's closed, and making sure that it's always available to be opened immediately for emergency vehicles, which is a current requirement that was clearly misunderstood on July 9th. Because every time the police and fire department always make a stipulation that the block party cannot obstruct emergency vehicles. And so what I think we have in mind is the DPW placing a wooden sawhorse with police signage on it, and that would be uniform. We know it can be moved in seconds if an emergency vehicle needs to get through, and it'll avoid any cars being parked, fences, whatever other obstructions people might like to try to use to block the road would not be allowed. The only way to close the road would be under the supervision of the DPW, or by the DPW under the supervision of the police department. So that is another recommendation we're making to the License Commission. And then the other authority the License Commission already has when it issues these types of permits that would extend to these special event permits would be the ability to require a police detail based upon the advice of the police department on a case-by-case basis. As you look at the list of different types of special events, there is such a wide range of different types of special events that are covered. There's no one uniform answer as to whether there should be a police detail required or not. But just like, and the best analogy I can give is one-day liquor licenses. When we issue a one-day liquor license for some type of special event, it has to be signed off on by police and fire, and the police chief has the authority to require a police detail if it's determined that that's in the public interest, and that would extend to this. So, based upon the advice of the chief of police, the License Commission could require a police detail as a requirement, a stipulation to get the permit. So, I want to thank everyone here for their help with this. This is a living, breathing ordinance change. We know it's going to go through a process. I anticipate that the City Council will send it to their ordinance subcommittee for a public hearing. Some of us may be asked to share our thoughts at that public hearing with the councilors, and we're certainly all, prepared and willing to work with the council on any amendments to this that they feel could further improve it. But I think we've put together a template to clarify an old ordinance, to give it some clear definitions, to put the authority for issuing these permits where it belongs at the License Commission, to put some teeth into it with authority of police and fire departments to revoke at any time. And by getting it to the License Commission, I think that we now make a very public process where both public safety agencies and neighbors will have an opportunity to weigh in with the License Commission before a permit is issued. So I thank everyone here for their work on this, and we will look forward to working with the City Council and the City Council Ordinance Subcommittee in any refinements they feel should be made so that we can get this enacted and get the authority for these permits over to